Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Misconceptions in History. And today, we're going to be talking about probably one of the most famous bombers of World War II and a fan favorite and always a crowd pleaser in modern-day air shows. That's right, we're looking at the B-17. Now, just the name alone, B-17, the Flying Fortress, really, just brings that image out there of a World War II bomber bravely flying through the sky, fighting Germans. And it really portrays an amazing image, and has been traded in multiple media forms, such as Memphis Belle, produced by Warner Brothers in 1990. It's also been seen in movies such as 12 O'Clock High, and the later TV series, seen in things such as like Death of a Ball Turret Gunner. The movie Heavy Metal had a scene about B-17. Also, Steven Spielberg in his anthology series, Amazing Stories, had an episode called The Mission, which had to do about ball turret gunners. But amazing as these things are, and as famous as this aircraft was, it almost didn't get made. It was actually a failure and was abandoned. But by happenstance and a loophole, it was saved. So let's go ahead and hit it. Let's look at where the origins of the B-17 come from. Now, this all starts in 1934 when the United States Army Air Corps basically put out a proposal for a replacement for their current bomber, the Martin B-10. Now, the B-10 was not a bad aircraft at all, and in fact, it was the first mass-produced bomber whose performance was better than that of fighter planes of the time. However, at the time, the Army wanted a bomber with a higher bomb capacity, better top speed, and better range. Now, three manufacturers entered it: Douglas with their B-18 Bolo, Martin with their Model 146, and Boeing with their upgrade of their experimental XB-15 known as the Model 299. And the plan was to basically have these three new aircraft compete against each other to see which one would be the superior aircraft. And it is during this testing that a reporter from the Seattle Times named Richard Williams, while looking at the Model 299 flying through the air, basically coins the phrase that it's a flying fortress, thus giving the future B-17 its nickname. Now, during testing, the Model 299 actually displays superior performance, better range, basically everything the Army was looking for. And Army doctrine at the time was starting to change, and they believed that this aircraft would become the future of Army doctrine for bomber aircraft. And those in charge of the Army liked this plane so much, they actually started talking about putting in an order for 65 aircraft even before the testing was completed. However, in October of 1935, during one of the test flights, the aircraft actually stalled after takeoff and then crashed into the ground, destroying the prototype 299. And because this was Boeing's only aircraft, they actually had to withdraw from the competition, and the Army as a whole rejected the Army Air Corps' request for additional testing and went with the B-18 instead. Now, this honestly should have been the end for the 299, and we would have never had the B-17 had it not been for a small group within the Army Air Corps really liking this aircraft. Now, utilizing a special legal loophole they found, they actually managed to put in an order for 13 Y-1 B-17s. And the Army Air Corps began a series of tests, developments, including creating what was known as the pre-flight checklist, which is a part of every modern flight to this day. Now, the fame of this aircraft began to rise again when the 2nd Bombardment Group utilized 3 of these Y-1 B-17s to intercept the Italian ocean liner Rex, about 610 miles off the coast of the United States. The photo associated with it helped build up buzz for the aircraft and allowed for continuous upgrades and modifications until we arrived at the B-17A. Now, by the time they entered service in World War II, there was actually only 200 B-17s available, but by the end of the war, 12,731 aircraft would be produced, the third most produced bomber of World War II. And the B-17 fought in every major theater of the war, from the Atlantic and Europe to Africa and even in the Pacific. And it wasn't only the United States who enjoyed the aircraft. The British absolutely loved it, as it filled the role for a heavy bomber until they could build their own. Now, initially these aircraft actually suffered heavy losses because the original doctrine had been that these aircraft were supposed to have so many guns on them that no enemy aircraft could touch them. However, it wouldn't be until heavier support aircraft like the P-51 and the P-47 came into play that the number of B-17s being lost was dropped and their role as a heavy bomber became more significant. Now, because of the sheer number of these aircraft produced, Other nations actually acquired them throughout the war. The Luftwaffe actually managed to get their hands on about 40 B-17s, and they were used from everything to train their pilots how to attack B-17s, to espionage roles, to transports. And the Japanese also did the same thing with managing to capture 3 of them and rebuilding them. Now, throughout the war, there was a few upgrades and modifications. One was known as the XB-38. And this was an attempt to replace the radial engines of a B-17 with V-12 Allison engine. And the test actually produced a faster B-17 that couldn't fly as high. The next attempt to modify B-17 was with a YB-40. And this aircraft is important because it introduced the concept of the gunship. The idea being that they would arm a B-17 with so many guns that no enemy aircraft would be able to approach it, or any airplanes it was escorting. And on average, they carried 18, but they could carry as many as 30 different guns for protection. There was even a cargo variant. Basically, they removed the bomb bay and designed the aircraft to carry heavier loads or even passengers. One unusual modification of the B-17 came from Operation Aphrodite. And basically, this used airframes that were in bad shape, loaded them with a ton of explosives and some radio equipment, and the idea was to radio control the B-17 into an enemy target. They were absolutely a disaster and never worked. Now, like so many other aircraft after World War II, that wasn't the end of the story for the B-17. Because of the amount of numbers, they were used as things such as drone targets, teaching jet fighter pilots how to use missiles to attack aircraft. They became popular for search and rescue roles. Due to their long range and heavy loads, they could even carry things such as life rafts that they could drop from the bottom of the aircraft. They even became popular with special operations, with a modification for the B-17 known as the Fulton Skyhook. Basically, it was a retrieval system that could utilize a weather balloon, and the weather balloon would be attached to an operative. The plane would come in, fly in with its hook, and retrieve the person. For those of you who are movie aficionados, you probably saw this in the 1965 James Bond film Thunderball, a personal favorite of mine. I do love Sean Connery, James Bond. And the B-17 was the go-to aircraft for this until the C-130 came about. Now, there was one final change to the B-17 after World War II, and that was the idea of the Boeing 307, which was a passenger liner built around the B-17's airframe. And it was a major advantage over the contemporaries at the time. It could fly over the weather, it had a pressurized cabin, better range, and it forced other airlines to kind of follow suit. Now the B-17 lives its life as a collector's item and a museum piece. There are currently only 45 B-17s left in the world, with 38 of them in the United States. And sadly, only 4 of them, as of November of last year, are in flight-capable form. Sadly, we did lose the 5th one, Texas Raiders, last November in a very horrific and tragic accident that has forced a lot of reevaluation of the usage of the B-17. So there you have it, just a quick look at the B-17, its history, how this amazing bomber really, just by happenstance and luck and a good legal loophole, even exists today. And that we should be very grateful that the Army Air Corps really fought for it, even though the main Army branch didn't want it. And that we wouldn't have had the bomber that really was a major success for the war. So that's it for today. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.